Good morning and welcome to our European dialogue promoted by Vita Communication Platform. I am very honored this morning to host the Vice President of the European Commission, Margaritis Schinas, to exchange with you. Welcome, Margaritis, on a wide topics, but we will see how it will be also very concrete, how to promote and to protect, to defend also the European way of life in this unprecedented pandemic time. Margaritis Schinas, Greek national, born in Thessaloniki in '62. We are of the same year. Huh? He has been a very long and a very outstanding European career, member and chief of cabinet of several commissioners during 10 years, then director, member of the European Parliament, then director of the EU Special Task Force for Greece in 2014 and 2015, in another unprecedented time of crisis. It was very challenging to deal with the Greek crisis as a Greek representing the European Commission. I remember when we met first in Athens during this time. And then chief spokesperson of, for 5 years of the Juncker team, Juncker president last legislation, and then vice president of von der Leyen team with this special denomination of promoting our European way of life. Under your portfolio, there are so many things. I just read some title just to make some example. You have to deal with a new pact on immigration and asylum, but also with the legal migration, the way of inclusion and integration. You are in charge of the European Security Union, but also how to fight and to prevent and to protect for all these new hybrid threats. You are in charge of the skill agenda, the European education area, but also the Union of Equality and Diversity, but also you are in charge of culture, sports, and the European Solidarity Corps, and finally, also with this dialogue with churches and religious association, and not forgetting on the fight against anti-Semitism that is raising again all around Europe. Promoting our European way of life was this strange title given by the President von der Leyen to this portfolio that at that time was very much discussed and raised so many issues. And I remember very well your outstanding interview in the Parliament when you were tasked about what does it means. And I think that we had to consider at this time that we were very much challenged by so many risks for our democracy, for our European value, for the Article 2 of the treaty as such, and also for external threat, but also internal threat, as a very last report of the Freedom House just delivered a few days ago warned us about the democracy that are losing currency, and also mentioned in some European countries that are in this sense. So in this time where we have to face another not scheduled crisis, is the pandemic crisis, where the fears, also restriction, also unprecedented way to stay together, to decide, to find union. How do you see how we can protect finally the European way of life that is the core of your portfolio?
Thank you, Luca. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor to take part in these Vita dialogues. And I thank you also for setting the stage of this discussion, starting with the European way of life, which is the common denominator of my portfolio responsibilities as Vice President in this Commission. And you are right to point out or to remind us at the beginning when this Vice Presidency was announced, we went through a rather schizophrenic and often self-flagellating debate on what really the European way of life means. I had the chance at the beginning to explain in very simple terms what my job is about. You would probably remember the famous speech by Emmanuel Macron in Sorbonne when he said that the future of Europe is a Europe that protects and a Europe that empowers, that opens opportunities and chances for everyone. So this is my job. Under the Europe that protects, we have to make sure that our union is protected in terms of security threats, borders. We have an orderly system for managing migration. We can organize common responses to health threats and pandemics. So that's one part. And the other part, the Europe that empowers, are policies that provide mobility opportunities for everyone, skills opportunities, bring us closer together, make us feel proud of being Europeans. And this is education, culture, youth, sport, values, skills, interreligious dialogue, and fight against anti-Semitism. So this is the framework. And in this framework, I think if there is one thing that we can be proud of, is that Europe today remains a beacon of light in a world that often seems dark and insecure and uncertain. We may not have warplanes or air carriers as Europeans, but we have our values, our systems. We are democracies. We protect the minorities. The role of women is safeguarded in the family and society, in the workplace. We have universal systems for public health and for education. We are the world champions of data protection, of human rights. We take care of our elderly. There is no death penalty. All these things together are what makes us unique. And to sum up this first round, I would say that the pandemic, these 15 awful months that we all went through, were a stark reminder of how precious it is to maintain the fundamentals of our way of life. Because during this horrible period, of course, Europe has been tested. Our way of life has been tested in all possible terms of rights, mobility, solidarity. But despite being tested and threatened and shaken, we didn't collapse. Europe stood firm together, and we revalidated the value of our public health and public education systems. We revalidated our model of society. We were able to show solidarity to our neighbors, friends. We organized the biggest vaccination program in the history of humanity. And we have now implementing a huge historic recovery fund so that we can all together come out of the crisis after the pandemic. So to cut a long story short, this is the European way of life. It's not about the label. It's not about the etiquette. It's not about what comes on the bottle. It's the content that matters.
Thank you, Margaritis. I don't know if you have seen the last Ipsos World Survey just done in April 2021, and it's very clear the result, what worries the world, the top 5 concerns. And the first is coronavirus, 45%. The second is unemployment, 35%. The third is poverty and social inequality, 31%. The fourth is financial and political corruption, 30%. And the crime and violence is only the fifth, with 25%. So we see here the real life, the real fears, what affect Europe. And as you already mentioned, in these last 15 months, so since the very beginning of the term of your commission, the pandemic, the vaccine strategy, the Green Pass now, the EU for Health, that was even not considered 1 year ago as part of the EU job, is not in the treaty. Health is not a competence of the European Union. COVAX, the try to lead the international solidarity worldwide to provide the support and vaccine, is the daily not easy business of the Commission, of von der Leyen, of all the team. So my question to you is, what is going in the good direction of all this that was not scheduled in your portfolio and in the priority of the Commission, that has become the priority of the Commission, even over the member state, much more over the member state ever. If we discuss about sovereignty, in this case, the Commission has taken a real lead with the other institution. And what is, in the other sense, not going in the good direction enough, or risk to go wrong? I'm thinking, for example, to this result of disruption of the freedom of circulation in Europe. That now we have so many rules that no one understands what to do, not only in one country, but between regions, between cities, and so on, and all this. Without forgetting that all this happens in time of concluding the Brexit negotiation. There was another disruption that a little forget. So this is the core. The pandemic, the coronavirus is the highest fears of people worldwide, as Ipsos is confirming to us. Commission is fully engaged. What is going in the good direction from your point of view? What makes you proud, and what makes you anxious about what risks to go wrong, or we're not doing enough together to respond?
Yes, when it comes to the European response to the pandemic, when it all started, and this was, as you rightly say, it was like a science fiction scenario. This was not something that people would expect. But at the beginning, there, early March, late February last year, we had to face two difficulties. The first difficulty was that member states, our governments, felt very surprised, and they somehow thought that the right response was to be national. So they did all the wrong things. They closed borders, they started competing against each other for protection equipment, from masks, from ventilators. They thought that the response would be national. That was one difficulty. Another difficulty was, you are a seasoned Brussels observer, you know that in the area of public health, the European Union does not have important competences in the treaties. So we had to compensate for these two difficulties. And I'm very happy that this was done quickly. This confusion only lasted 2-3 weeks, because then member states very quickly understood the interdependence of our systems, the magnificent power of our internal market, and the integrated supply chains that the internal market brings, so that we can have our supermarkets fully stocked, that we can have key movement of goods and services. So very quickly, we switched from egoistic mode to community mode. We started coordinating, we started joining forces to have joint procurement of private protection equipment and so on and so forth. We coordinated the decisions on the borders. We injected more and more Europe into the response. And at the same time, we, as institutions, we explored and exploited every single centimeter of our competence in health policy to do things that have never been done before. It was a small miracle that we put together, now fully implementing this European program of vaccines. Can you imagine what would have meant for member states fight each other over vaccines instead of going all together. We are building gradually an EU health union with a new self-standing dedicated program for the next 7 years, EU for Health. We have reinforced the statutes of our two agencies in health, the ECDC in Stockholm and the European Medicines Agency in Amsterdam. We are building more work on biopreparedness with the future creation of a new agency, HERA, the Health Emergency Response Authority. So we are building up this capacity. And that was on the public health side. And on the economic side, we crossed the Rubicon in summer last year with this unprecedented historic step of a recovery and resilience fund that for the first time brings everybody together on the basis of a symmetric response to a symmetric crisis. So 15 months later, and despite this tragedy that cost many lives of our fellow citizens and that threatened the way we live and it was a shock for our societies, I think that only someone of really bad will would not recognize that Europe managed to do well in a pandemic response on all possible sides of the spectrum of the response. So to answer your question more directly on the good parts and the wrong parts of the response, I have no doubt to say that the difficult part was the first stage. The first 2 or 3 weeks was exactly the Europe that we do not want in terms of crisis. And on the good side, I think it's everything that followed since. The EU Health Union, solidarity, the vaccines program, and the recovery fund. Overall, I think it's a positive balance.
I fully share with you your evaluation, and as you had the privilege or also the heavy task to be at the core of two different crises. The first one was the financial and the economic crisis, that with also the social crisis, where mostly the European response was an intergovernmental response. That was very clear. And with binding rules, austerity measure, and we all remember this time. And this raised so many anti-European moods. This anti-governmental approach, mainly tasked to face a crisis. It was a big crisis that risked to destroy Europe, and fortunately it's not destroyed. We saved Europe, but it was an intergovernmental approach, fully. And the result was the fear in 2018 to have an explosion of anti-European, racist, xenophobic, extremist responses. Fortunately, we didn't have. This time, after the 2-3 weeks, and with some temptation that are still there in some discussion today, we can say perhaps that the spirit of Europe came back stronger, because there has been much more a communitarian response, with the member state of board, of course, but has been a true European. So the balance has moved again through the European community, if you can go back to use this ancient name of European Union. And as you mentioned, not only the vaccine strategy, giving de facto competence to the European Union that the Commission didn't have by the treaty or by the Next Generation EU. I used very often in the past this example. In the first crisis, Europe took 4 years to say is whatever it takes. This time it started in a few weeks, but it took no more than 4 months to arrive to the vaccine strategy and to the Next Generation EU in July. So we have also this difference in timing. So do you think that this moving towards from the intergovernmental response that was the only possible in that moment, of course, to this new communitarian response is the way to go and will stand for long, is a structural change in European Union, as we have been for so long, for 30 years now, at the core of the European institution, or will be a momentum and now perhaps at the end of this year we will move back to the old history of the national mood?
That's an excellent approach, a question, a reflection, because looking back at the history of European integration, I would say from the beginning, there are two patterns that have been developing since the founding fathers until our day. The first pattern was a pattern of stagnation, of a rather feel-good factor, of indifference, of okay, we don't need to do anything, the ball is rolling. And the second pattern was, we are on fire, let's do something, and let's do it together. So these two patterns have shaped the way the European integration process evolved. And I have no doubt, the slightest of doubts, to say that the worst enemy of Europe is pattern number one, stagnation and feel-good factor, because this pattern implies that there is no additional effort, there's no need for additional effort, whereas pattern of crisis and stress and pressure on Europe is something that always compels the European Union to do better, to do it together, and to do it efficiently. Let me give you some examples. When Jacques Delors came and took over in the mid-80s, there were 30 years of stagnation before him. We had an obligation to build a single market already from the Treaty of Rome in 1957, and nothing has happened since 85. So Delors comes and says, look, I will kick the table with the glasses and I will start again and I will do a single market by the 92. And he did it. Then you would remember in the 90s, Europe went through a sequence of horrible food crises, the mad cow disease, the dioxin crisis. So people were saying, why do we need Europe if Europe cannot guarantee the quality of our food on the table? So as a result of that, now we have the most complete system for food safety in the world. Europe had never had better quality and cheaper food than we have now. In the years 2000, we had the debt crisis and the financial crisis that caught us with no instruments, no mechanism, no legal basis, and with 4 countries of the Union at the brink of the abyss. So we had to start from scratch. We built the EFSF, the ESM, new rules for the euro, the economic semester. We built the capacity response.
They were five at the beginning. They were called the pigs. You remember, no? The pigs.
Five. Although Spain was a more specific case compared to the other 4.
Yeah.
Then migration crisis, same thing. And now the pandemic. So again, this is what has shaped the process of integration. Each time that the system, the people, the governments, our societies feel threatened, they naturally go fast, they go community way, they use the community method, and they advance. Each time they feel victims of this stagnation and feel-goodism factor, if I can put it like this, then you have intergovernmental solutions and muddle through and piecemeal. A final reflection in answering this question, Luca. In my ideal world, this should not be either or. This should be a model of policy development and integration that allows us to do always better together and not waiting for the crisis to remind us of the need to do it together. Someone was using a metaphor saying, why do we need first the firefighters and then the architects. Why can't we have the architects so we do not need firefighters? And I find this metaphor very nice. I mean, why do we need to build on something that is a threat to Europe and not build it under normal circumstances in the knowledge that this is good for Europe? That's my personal take on this question.
I fully agree on this. I will come with my last question on this conversation on this issue of architecture and firefighters. But let's go to another issue, Margaritis, because you say that Europe learned from the crisis and finally in the crisis arrived to give answer. And the answer given in this crisis, as you mentioned, are absolutely unprecedented. We broke so many taboo in Europe, even the Eurobonds. We do not call it Eurobonds, but the 750 billion euro of the Next Generation EU are de facto Eurobonds. We do not call Eurobonds, but they are going to the market. The European Union is going to the market and doing what has been done is unprecedented. But there is one crisis where we are still in the middle of nowhere. We are still in the middle of the intergovernmental vetoes. And I mentioned the migration that you also quote as one of the crises. So what strikes me is we arrive in this unprecedented crisis that touch life of people, fundamental values, pandemic, to have an unprecedented system of response, even changing the mandate of the Commission without changing the treaty and giving power and giving a role to the ACB, Commission, and so on. And since 8 years, Lampedusa, where all the European leaders of the institution were in Lampedusa with the Italian Prime Minister in front of this more than 300 deaths, we haven't been capable to make what should be done to solve the crisis, this crisis. Your commission started with a promise of Ursula von der Leyen in 3 months to have a new migration pact. It took more months because of the not easy negotiation with the member states. Finally, there was a proposal that some has considered as a to mitigate proposal in September, but we are in May, and still there is no consensus for the member state and consider that you are going too far, no consensus for the parliament and consider that you are not going far enough, and we are still in the middle of nowhere. Another tragedy occurs in the Sicily Channel just last weeks. You are Greek, and the Greek islands are under growing pressure again. We hope not as it was in 2018. Spain, for the moment, seems to be calm, but it is to go over. Migration continues to be a divisive issue between Europeans. We do not arrive to have what Enrico Letta has called a next migration pact, next generation for migration. So why we are not capable to make our value this capacity to deal with the crisis and to reach something, and where we have to go, because here we are facing day by day, week by week, year by year, new crisis, new people dying, new people that is scandalous. Also thinking what happens in Lipa, in Bosnia camp. So this is not European values that finally.
Yes, I largely agree with you, but not entirely. In the 15th, 16th peak of the crisis, where we had something like 10,000 people coming into Europe per day, Europe again, as previously in pattern number 2, tried to do something. And we did something at the time, but I have to admit that this response was elliptical. It was not holistic. It was not a cohesive global European framework for dealing with migration. It was again a lot of firefighting and with some architecture efforts to build something new. So although firefighting somehow worked, the architects failed completely, because you would remember that there was a proposal for a new asylum policy at the time, but that was not approved. It was actually blocked. So again, under threat, we try to do, but the quality of the European response at that time was not optimal. It was elliptical. And part of the problems, if not all the problems that you mentioned, which is everything that annoys us, everything that makes us sad, the Moriases, the Lampedusas, the Libya, the Canary Islands, the Calais, all these black spots, the bottlenecks, are precisely the result of this current system, which I would call a non-system. It's a patchwork of different regulatory solutions that produce very uneven regulatory outcomes and does not give us this holistic, cohesive view that we need as Europeans. So to remedy that, we have put on the table, I agree, with some delay in September last year, but we had to wait for the recovery fund first, because we didn't want to put everything at the same time at the table. You know, the heads of state and government, they prefer sequencing of important initiatives. They don't want everything together. So we were ready in September. Our proposal is on the table. It is the first proposal ever to replace the existing non-system with a new framework, a true European framework, where everything connects to everything else. So I like to present it like a three floors building. The quality and the resistance of all three floors has to be equal so that the building stays strong. First floor, we need to build new relations with our countries of origin and transit, our neighbors, to help them so that they can keep their people there, creating better conditions for their lives there, rather than putting their lives in the hands of the smugglers in the Mediterranean or in the Aegean or in the Atlantic. We need to help them take back people that do not have the right to be in Europe and reintegrate them into society. So this is important. The second floor is build a new system for border management. Europe is a union. It is totally unfair to leave the responsibility only to the frontline member states to deal with border management and border procedures. This is a common European responsibility. That's why we now have Frontex and the European Border and Coast Guard that will be much more present with many more coast guards and much more resources to help. And the third and important floor will be the solidarity and burden sharing. We need in this system that everybody accepts a fair share of the responsibility and the solidarity in migration. It is not meaningful, it is not sustainable that 5 member states do the work for the rest of 2022. It will not work like this. Everybody has to contribute to this solidarity pot, the solidarity mix, with different kind of contributions that are meaningful. There will be no exit door from the solidarity floor. Everybody would have to contribute. And now, to conclude my answer, now we are at this stage where for the first time, I think there is certain convergence of member states around our proposal. We are not yet there, because in migration touches the hard core of national sovereignty. There are very strong feelings in the capitals, and governments have very, very present red lines and issues that need discussion. But we need an agreement. We need a European agreement, because we cannot allow Europe to fail twice on such an important subject.
Yes, and we hope we will go in this direction. And you mentioned the 3 floors, but there is also another floor that is quite important, that concern perhaps the 90% of the migrants that are already in our countries. And for this, you present an inclusion and integration action plan last end of November that is not so much under the light, but it is quite crucial, because we also see that racism and anti-Semitism and xenophobic can raise, not only for the women that are coming at our border, but for the women that are living in our country where we are not acting. And on this, the Commission is doing a lot. But I will go to my last question, that you were mentioned the architect. And I was saying that at the very beginning that in your portfolio, you have also a role about education and culture. And as a Greek national born in Thessaloniki, you are, of course, absolutely aware of the role of culture in shaping our public space and also the future of Europe. And you know that when I was the president of DSE, I very much pushed for the renaissance and having culture as a leading role to build up the future of tomorrow. And now the President von der Leyen has launched this new European Bauhaus process. And she said just last Thursday that economics, and I quote, economics and politics are necessary, but not sufficient. We need more, a common narrative, something that makes us to feel, to be engaged, and make the biggest transition in Europe, the Green Deal, something that will deal with the concrete everyday life of every European. So how do you feel about this push for culture? It's the first time that I was the first president in the European institution to take culture as a priority. Now, the President von der Leyen, the Commission, is taking culture in this sense, because the new European Bauhaus is intended to become a lead. Commissioner Gabriel and Commissioner Ferreira are also very directly engaged in this process. Do you feel something new that is happening? And it's also good that this is starting when the Conference on the Future of Europe is starting, but perhaps the real Conference on the Future of Europe will be done much more by the European Bauhaus way to raise the architect instead of the firefighters.
Yes, on the new European Bauhaus, I think, although culture is within my remit, and I work with Maria Gabriel, the commissioner in charge, very closely together, I have to say that I have never understood the new European Bauhaus as a purely cultural endeavor. On the contrary, I would say that the new European Bauhaus, as we presented it, the president presented it last September, was precisely a way of marrying, bringing together culture with research, technology, environment, habitat, ecosystems, natural resources, architecture. So to put it in very simple terms, so all our viewers can understand it, is the sort of trace that the human race will leave behind in all aspects of our existence, from culture to architecture to green transition to forestry to buildings to research to. So it's the broad spectrum of the magnificent strength of humans in a given era that would make the difference for the next generations. You know that the Bauhaus was, let's call it a more German trend, architectural and cultural, between the wars, that was very specific of this transition. But now we have another transition. This was a peaceful transition. Now we have a transformative transition. We have a transition to the Green Deal, to Green Europe, to digital Europe, to more sustainable Europe, to a new kind of research and development in vaccines, in genomics, and all this linked to culture, to our values, to what we stand for, to why people admire Europe today. So it's a fantastic opportunity. Of course, this is a project run by the president herself, although I was very involved from the beginning. But I really think that it would be to the collective benefit of everybody if this Bauhaus endeavor is understood in its broader sense of what our race, what us human in the 21st century are able to leave behind in all these key areas of our development.
Thank you, Margaritis. As you for sure remember, the well-known master of architecture, that is the Roman Vitruvius, established the rule for architecture. He was used to say that architecture is much more than geometry. It is designing the space where human relation happens. And that is culture, finally, because human are not only done by physics, but that's also how you feel, how you build up your sense of belonging to something, to an adventure, to a community, to a country, to a Europe. And as you were saying, we are now going in a transformational transition that is much more challenging. And this need not only structure and policies as European Union set up, but also a large change in mindset. And that's what I see is the role of culture today and the European Bauhaus. I prefer Renaissance, but I like this Bauhaus as the name that the President von der Leyen has chosen for make this European Renaissance lively. Thank you so much, really, for your time, for this 40 minutes of very lively conversation. I think we have touched upon very subject, but perhaps we have made a little more clear for all what protecting, that was the original word, and promoting our European way of life is not building walls, but is cultivating our soul, our value, to open windows and bridges with the others and with the future. Thank you so much, and I'm sure and grateful for the time, because I know that you are usually very, very busy in this very challenging time.
Thank you, and thank you all for listening.